Everything at my brother's business launch seemed perfect. But then my wife leaned in and whispered, "We need to leave. Now." I was confused. Why? She wouldn't say a word until we got to the car. She finally turned to me and said, "Your family is stealing your inheritance while scamming retirees. You really didn't see it, did you? Your family is stealing your—" I'm Michael. I'm 35 years old, and I discovered my own family was systematically stealing my inheritance to fund a fraudulent scheme targeting retirees. Before I tell you how I exposed them in front of all their friends and brought their world crashing down, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I try to read every single one. It all started at a party. One of those ridiculously over-the-top events that only my younger brother, Nathan, could dream up. It was the official launch of his new, sustainable investment fund. An entity with a name so blandly corporate, it sounded both important and meaningless at the same time. The venue was a slick, modern art gallery downtown. A place of white walls, polished concrete floors, and sculptures that looked like they could injure you if you stood too close. Chandeliers that resembled frozen explosions dripped from the ceiling. Champagne, the expensive kind I could never justify buying, flowed like water. And smiling waiters, all looking like aspiring actors, offered appetizers on silver trays. Things like a single scallop with a saffron foam, or a speck of caviar on a black cracker. Each one was a bite of food that probably cost more than my first car payment. Nathan was in his element, a shark in a tuxedo, gliding through the crowd with a movie star smile plastered on his face. He'd always been the golden child, the one who could talk his way into or out of anything. My parents, Edward and Patricia, trailed him like royal attendants, their faces beaming with a kind of incandescent pride I hadn't seen directed my way in, well, ever. My father clapped influential-looking men on the back, steering them toward Nathan. My mother would touch the arm of a wealthy widow, her voice a conspiratorial whisper as she sang her youngest son's praises. I'm a counselor. My job is to listen, to observe, to understand the currents running beneath the surface of what people say. And as I stood there, nursing a club soda with a limp lime wedge, I felt a familiar, heavy knot tighten in my stomach. Something was fundamentally wrong. The extravagance didn't feel like a celebration of success. It felt like a stage performance, a desperate attempt to look the part. The smiles felt rehearsed. But I did what I always did. I pushed it down. This was Nathan's night. I was here to be the supportive older brother. That was my role. Then my wife, Emma, materialized at my side. Her scent, a mix of lavender and the crisp, clean, antiseptic smell of the hospital where she works as a doctor, was a small, sane comfort in the suffocating atmosphere. She leaned in close. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice tight with an urgency that immediately put me on high alert. Now, I was completely baffled. What? Why? He hasn't even given the main presentation yet. That's exactly why we need to go, she insisted, her eyes not looking at me, but darting around the room, cataloging every interaction. Her hand gripped my arm with surprising force. "Please, Michael, don't ask questions here. Just trust me." The genuine alarm in her voice was undeniable. She wasn't being dramatic. She saw something I didn't. I made our excuses, mumbling something about an early morning shift for Emma, enduring my mother's disappointed frown. We walked out into the cool night air, the muffled sound of the party fading behind us. The moment the car door closed, sealing us in a bubble of silence, the entire facade of the evening shattered. I turned to her, the engine humming quietly. "Okay, what on earth was that all about?" Emma took a deep, shaky breath, her face pale and serious under the passing streetlights. She finally turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and steely resolve. You really didn't see it, did you?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "See what, Emma?" All I saw was Nathan being Nathan. She hesitated, as if searching for the right words to deliver a fatal diagnosis. Then they came out in a controlled rush. "It's a scam, Michael. The whole thing. It's a fraudulent investment scheme targeting retirees. And your parents, they're in on it." They're the ringleaders. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. A scam. My family. It didn't make sense. It was impossible. No, I said, shaking my head automatically. No, you're wrong. Nathan wouldn't. My parents would never. He is, she said, her voice firm, cutting through my denial. Then she delivered the final, devastating blow. A sentence that would become the starting point of the worst year of my life. And I think this is how they're stealing your inheritance. That was the hook. That was the moment my world, which I thought was built on a solid, if sometimes frustrating foundation, turned to sand. I didn't know it then, but Emma's words were a declaration of war. A war I hadn't even known was being waged against me, right under my nose, for my entire life. For a long, ringing moment, I just stared at her. The city lights blurred past the window. My mind was a frantic scramble, a Rolodex of memories spinning wildly, trying to find anything that would refute what she'd just said. Came up empty. Emma, that's an insane accusation. I finally managed, my voice sounding hollow and defensive even to my own ears. You don't know them like I do. They can be difficult. They have their flaws. But they are not criminals. My father values his reputation above everything. Does he? She shot back, her usual calm demeanor cracking to reveal the fierce intelligence beneath. Or does he value the appearance of a good reputation? There's a difference, Michael. And what about your mother? Is it difficult to actively push your elderly friends towards a financial product that promises impossible returns? I overheard her talking to the Wilsons. She called Nathan's fund a gift from God for people on a fixed income. Does that sound like a responsible thing to say? The Wilsons, a gentle, retired couple who used to live down the street from us. Mr. Wilson always had a Werther's Original in his pocket for me when I was a kid. The image of my mother leading them into a financial trap made me feel sick. We got home and the argument, now a low-simmering battle between my lifelong conditioning and her clear-eyed logic, continued in our kitchen. I paced back and forth while she stood leaning against the counter, her arms crossed, watching me. They raised me, I said, my voice pleading for her to understand. They put me through school. They gave me a home. Yes, they did, Emma agreed, her voice softening slightly. They fulfilled their basic obligations as parents. But they invested in Nathan. They invested their hopes, their money, their forgiveness. Every time he failed, it was a learning experience. Every time he screwed up, you were the one expected to fix it. When was the last time they sacrificed anything for you? Her question hung in the air, and my mind, against my will, started supplying the answers. The betrayal wasn't a single event. It was 1,000 tiny cuts accumulated over a lifetime. I was 19, a sophomore in college, working 2 jobs to save up for a semester abroad program in Spain. It was my dream. I had the brochure pinned to the corkboard above my desk. 3 weeks before the final payment was due, I got a frantic call from Nathan. He was a freshman at a different university, a more expensive one my parents had insisted on. He'd gotten in with a bad crowd, discovered online poker, and had lost not just his tuition money, but another $5,000 he'd borrowed from someone you don't want to owe money to. I drove 4 hours to his dorm. I found him pale and shaking. I spent the entire weekend talking to the person he owed money to, negotiating. In the end, I drained my savings account, every penny I had saved for Spain, to pay his debt and his overdue tuition. When I told my parents, expecting some sort of recognition for the sacrifice, my mother had simply sighed. Well, that's what family is for. Thank you for being the responsible one, Michael. We knew we could count on you. My father just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good man. Your brother owes you one." Nathan never paid me back. I never went to Spain. Then there was the car. When I graduated and got my first real job, I saved up and bought a sensible, reliable used Honda. A year later, Nathan, who had dropped out of college, decided he wanted to be a freelance photographer. My father co-signed a loan for him to buy a brand new sports car because he needs to project an image of success. Nathan crashed it 6 months later. My father paid the insurance deductible and helped him get another one. And the most damning memory of all, the one that now felt like a cold stone in my stomach. Me at 25, sitting at their heavy mahogany dining table. It was a Sunday afternoon. My father had spread a thick stack of papers in front of me, full of dense legal text. "Just some family business restructuring, son," he'd said, his tone casual, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "Our lawyer, old Mr. Abernathy, said it's a smart way to handle taxes and protect the family assets for the future. It's for both you and Nathan. Just a formality." I remember the flicker of professional unease. I was just starting my own counseling practice. I knew the importance of reading the fine print. Shouldn't I read it first? Or have my own lawyer look at it? My mother had let out a light, tinkling laugh, the one she always used to dismiss any unpleasantness. "Oh, Michael, don't be so serious. It's just family business. Your father has been managing these things since before you were born. Do you not trust us?" There it was, the emotional checkmate. To refuse would be to accuse them of malice. It would be to declare that I, their son, did not trust them. And the son I had been raised to be could never do that. So I picked up the heavy, expensive pen he offered me and I signed. I signed my name over and over on pages I didn't understand, because it was easier to risk my financial future than to risk a single moment of their disapproval. Back in my kitchen, the weight of these memories was suffocating. I finally stopped pacing and looked at Emma. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. The next day, my resolve to prove Emma wrong had completely evaporated. Now I just needed to know the truth, no matter how ugly. I needed to take action. I decided to call Nathan, to hear the lies for myself. "Hey, bro!" His voice boomed through the phone, painfully cheerful. "Heard you and Emma had to bail early. Everything okay?" "Yeah, fine. Emma had an early shift." I lied, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Listen, I was just calling to say congrats again. The party was really impressive." Impressive, right? A list all the way. You gotta spend money to make money, you know? It's all about the image. "Right, the image," I said, my hand tightening on the phone. "I was just a little curious about the fund's actual structure. You were throwing around some big numbers. What's the underlying asset? How do you hedge against market downturns?" I was using terms I'd picked up from financial news, trying to sound knowledgeable. There was a pause. It was infinitesimally brief, but for a trained ear, it was a canyon of silence. It was the sound of him switching masks, from laid-back brother to slick salesman. It's a proprietary diversification algorithm, Mike," he said, his voice now a smooth, practiced pitch. "We leverage synergistic opportunities in the sustainable energy and biotech sectors. It's pretty complex, high-level stuff. Honestly, most of it is way above my pay grade. I just sell the vision, you know?" It was a masterfully constructed wall of gibberish. All sizzle, no steak. My heart sank. He was hiding something. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's just that I have a few colleagues, older guys with some money to invest, and they're the cautious type. They'd want to know more about the fundamentals before they'd even consider it." "Hey, no problem at all. You just have them call my office. I'll have one of my people walk them through the prospectus. Trust me, it's a sure thing. The safest bet in town. Trust me." There it was again. The phrase had become a trigger for me. After I hung up, I sat in my home office, the silence ringing in my ears. I needed more. I needed something from outside the family bubble. My mind went back to the party. I remembered my mom mentioning a few months ago that Nathan's longtime assistant, a young woman named Jessica, had quit unexpectedly. My mother had framed it as Jessica being flighty and unreliable. Now I saw it in a different light. Finding her wasn't easy. She wasn't on social media anymore, and my mother claimed to have lost her contact information. It took me 2 days of calling mutual acquaintances and old interns from Nathan's previous failed startup before I got a number. When I called, she was immediately on guard. "Who is this?" I used my calmest, most non-threatening voice, the one I use for my most anxious clients. "Jessica, my name is Michael Howard. I'm Nathan's brother. Please don't hang up. I'm not calling on his behalf. I'm calling for myself. I heard her take a shaky breath. I don't want any trouble. There won't be any, I promised. I just have a few questions about why you left. It would be completely confidential. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? She was reluctant, but I think she heard the sincerity in my voice. We agreed to meet at a generic, anonymous coffee shop chain halfway between our homes. She was a nervous woman in her late 20s, perched on the edge of her chair, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked like she was expecting Nathan to burst through the door at any moment. I signed an NDA, she said before I could even speak. I can't talk about the company's specifics. I'm not asking about trade secrets, Jessica, I said gently. I'm asking about your experience. I need to understand. Why did you leave a job you'd been at for 2 years so suddenly? She looked down at her hands, then finally met my eyes. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a flicker of defiance. Because he's a crook, Michael, and I couldn't be a part of it anymore. My breath caught. What do you mean? He had me create 2 sets of everything, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. 2 sets of marketing brochures. 2 sets of performance projections. One was for sophisticated investors, the real players. That one was full of disclaimers, risk assessments, and conservative numbers. The other one, he called it the mom and pop version. That was for the elderly people your parents brought in. All the disclaimers were gone. The projected returns were insane. 30%, 40% a year. It was fantasy. What about actual performance reports? I asked, my voice hoarse. She let out a bitter little laugh. There was no performance. There was no algorithm. The fund was just a single business bank account. My main job was to take the money from new investors and use it to pay dividends to the first few investors to make it look profitable. It's a classic Ponzi scheme. He asked me to fake a quarterly report for a potential new investor, a big one. He wanted me to completely fabricate the numbers. That's when I walked out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't have that on my conscience. She had no documents. She had been smart enough to just walk away clean, leaving everything behind. But her testimony was a nuclear bomb. It confirmed every one of Emma's fears, and then some. I must have sat there, stunned, for a full minute after she left. The truth was so much uglier than I had imagined. I drove home in a daze. When I walked in the door, Emma was there, waiting. She didn't have to ask. She saw the devastation on my face. You found something, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat tight. I sank onto the sofa, the weight of it all threatening to crush me. It's true, I said, the words feeling like poison. All of it. He's running a Ponzi scheme. He's targeting old people. I looked at my wife, the one person in my life who had always seen me clearly, the one person who had the courage to tell me the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And I know where the seed money came from, I said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. That restructuring I signed years ago, I think I signed away my inheritance without even knowing it. That's his slush fund. My money, my future. They're using it to ruin other people's lives. The war wasn't coming. It had been raging for years, and I had been its first, most oblivious casualty. The next morning, the world felt different. It was as if a filter had been removed from my eyes. The casual, familial trust I'd lived with my entire life was gone, vaporized. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't just a victim anymore. My grief was quickly calcifying into a grim resolve. I was going to stop them. My first stop was the gleaming downtown office of David Pham. David and I had been friends since our freshman year of college, where we'd bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared love for bad action movies. Now, he was a sharp, no-nonsense litigator with a reputation for being a bulldog in the courtroom. His BS detector was second to none. I laid out the whole sordid story in his glass-walled conference room, the city skyline sprawling out behind him. I told him about the party, Emma's instant suspicion, my stilted conversation with Nathan, and finally, Jessica's gut-wrenching testimony. David listened intently, his fingers steepled, his face unreadable. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the silence in the room felt heavy. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair and let out a long, slow breath. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "Just wow. Michael, I'm sorry. This is a level of betrayal I wouldn't wish on anyone." He leaned forward, all business now. "Okay. From a legal standpoint, here's where we are. Jessica's testimony is powerful, but without documentation, a good defense attorney will paint her as a disgruntled ex-employee. It's hearsay. We need hard proof. We need documents." "What kind of documents?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. For the first time, I had a knowledgeable ally. "Two kinds," David said, holding up his fingers. "First, and most importantly, we need to get our hands on those restructuring papers you signed. They are the Rosetta Stone for this whole thing. They will prove the motive, the financial predicate for the fraud. It's the original sin." I felt a familiar flush of shame. "I don't have a copy. I never asked for one. I just signed." "Of course you did," David said, his voice laced with understanding, not judgment. "They're your family. They leveraged that trust. It's a classic tactic in financial abuse cases. Second, we need to find the money trail. Where is the fund's actual capital coming from, and where is it going? We need bank statements, wire transfers. Anything that shows money from your trust going into their pockets, or being used to pay off early investors." He paused. "This is a two-front war, my friend. A civil case to recover your stolen inheritance, and a criminal case for the financial fraud. They are intrinsically connected." I left his office with a clear, if daunting, strategy. I had a purpose. As I was getting into my car, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Aunt Susan." I hesitated, then answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Michael, honey, how are you?" she chirped, her voice a cascade of sugary warmth. She always sounded like she was smiling, even when delivering bad news. "I'm fine, Aunt Susan. What's up?" I said, trying to keep my voice from sounding as brittle as I felt. "Oh, I was just talking to your mother. She told me you and Emma had to leave the party early. Such a shame. It was just a wonderful, wonderful night. We are all so unbelievably proud of our Nathan. He's a real go-getter, that one." "Yeah, he is," I said through gritted teeth. "Oh, and listen, the real reason I'm calling is to make sure you have the date saved for your parents' retirement party. It's next month at the country club. It's going to be a huge affair. And your mother had the most brilliant idea. Nathan is going to give a special private presentation to all their dearest friends. To help them secure their assets for their golden years. Isn't that just the most thoughtful thing?" My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't thoughtful. It was predatory. They were assembling the herd for the slaughter. "That's great, Aunt Susan," I managed to say. I wouldn't miss it for the world. This was their D-Day. I had 1 month to find the evidence I needed to stop a catastrophe. The anger was a clean, hot fire in my gut now. This wasn't just about my money anymore. This was about honor. It was about the Wilsons and God knows how many others like them. That night, I decided I had to get inside my father's head. He was the architect, the cold-blooded pragmatist. He wouldn't be swayed by an emotional appeal. He respected only strength and success. I knew he played golf at his exclusive club every Saturday morning, a ritual as sacred as church. The following weekend, I put on my nicest polo shirt and happened to be there, practicing my swing at the driving range. When I saw him and his foursome finishing up on the 18th green, I made my way to the clubhouse bar. "Dad?" I said, putting on my best casual smile as he walked in, smelling of sunshine and expensive cigars. "Fancy seeing you here." He looked genuinely surprised, but also pleased. It fed his narrative that I was finally taking an interest in his world. "Michael, good to see you getting some air. Thought you were always cooped up with your sad sack patients." A casual, cutting remark, delivered with a smile. Classic dad. "Trying to find a better work-life balance," I said, gesturing for the bartender. "Let me buy you a drink." We sat at a small, dark wood table overlooking the perfectly manicured course. For a few minutes, we made the kind of strained small talk fathers and sons make when they have nothing in common. We talked about the weather, about a recent football game. Then I made my move. I was thinking more about Nathan's new venture. I began, swirling the ice in my glass. It's a bold play. High risk, high reward, I imagine. My father, Edward, took a slow, deliberate sip of his 18-year-old single malt scotch. You have to be bold to get ahead in this world, Michael. Fortune favors the bold. It's a lesson Nathan understands. The jab was subtle, but it landed. Of course, I said, pointedly ignoring it. I was just thinking from a psychological standpoint about your investor base, especially your friends. They're at an age where capital preservation is usually the #1 goal. An aggressive, high-yield fund like this, that's a lot of risk for them to take on, isn't it? He looked at me over the rim of his glass, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Suspicion? In his cold, blue eyes. It's not about risk, Michael. It's about trust. They trust me. They trust our family's name. And they see Nathan's passion, his vision. He's a winner. He leaned in a little, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. And besides, sometimes you have to accept a little risk to get a big reward. You're too cautious. You analyze everything to death. You always have been. It's your biggest weakness. There it was. Weakness. The word he had used to define me my whole life. My empathy, my caution, my desire for everyone to get along. He saw it all as a fatal flaw. And in that moment, sitting in that stuffy, exclusive clubhouse, I understood that he wasn't just a passive accomplice in Nathan's scheme. He was the ideologue. He truly believed Nathan's ruthlessness was a virtue and my compassion was a liability. He believed he was entitled to make these decisions for everyone else, because he thought he was the only one strong enough, the only one smart enough to do so. My final play was the riskiest. I needed a real lead, a thread I could pull on that would unravel the whole damn sweater. I needed Nathan to slip up, and I knew his ego was his Achilles heel. Emma and I invited him and his new girlfriend, a vapid but beautiful model named Tiffany, over for dinner. We played the part of the adoring, supportive family. We went all out. I grilled thick, expensive ribeye steaks, Nathan's favorite. Emma made her famous garlic mashed potatoes. I opened a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon that cost over $100. The conversation was painstakingly light. I didn't mention the fund for the first hour. I asked Tiffany about a recent photo shoot in Milan. I let Nathan brag about a new sports car he was thinking of buying. I was the perfect, unassuming, slightly boring older brother. I could feel him relaxing, letting his guard down, feeling superior. Then, as we were having dessert, a chocolate lava cake Emma had made from scratch, I leaned back in my chair, feigning a sudden, casual inspiration. You know, Nate, I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me. I was talking to a colleague of mine, a guy who manages a small private family fund. He was saying the real challenge these days, with all the regulations and taxes, is offshore asset protection. He was complaining about how complicated it is. How do you guys handle that? Is the fund entirely domestic, or do you have an international arm? I was banking on his overwhelming need to seem like a big shot, a global player, especially in front of his new girlfriend who looked impressed by the expensive wine. It worked like a charm. He puffed out his chest, placing his arm proprietorially around Tiffany's chair. Oh, absolutely not, Mike. You can't be competitive in this day and age if you're only domestic. That's small-time thinking. We have a partner entity in the Caymans, Ironclad. It handles all the international clearing and tax sheltering. It's the secret sauce, really. Wow, I said, widening my eyes in fake admiration. That sounds complicated. It is, he said, taking the bait. But you have to have the best people. It's called, Polaris Holdings. Totally firewalled. Completely untouchable. He said it so casually, so arrogantly. Tiffany was busy taking a selfie with her dessert, but Emma and I, across the table, exchanged a look. It was a microscopic glance, but it contained a universe of meaning. It was a look of pure, terrifying victory. Polaris Holdings. He had no idea he'd just handed me the keys to his destruction. He thought he was impressing his dull older brother. He thought I was the same old Michael, the weak link, the one who could be easily managed, dismissed, and stolen from. Later, as they were leaving, Nathan clapped me on the shoulder, a little too hard. "Good seeing you, bro. You and Emma should come out with us sometime. I'll show you how the other half lives." "Definitely," I said, a cold, thin smile on my face. "We'd like that." I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Emma came and stood in front of me, her expression grim but triumphant. "You got it," she said. "I got it?" I confirmed, the name tasting like power and poison in my mouth. Polaris Holdings. The name felt like a weapon in my hand. The storm was no longer just beginning. I was in the middle of it, and for the first time in my life I felt ready to fight back. The name Polaris Holdings was a turning point. It transformed the battle from a defensive crouch into an offensive charge. My abstract suspicions now had a concrete target. The next day, I was back in David Pham's pristine conference room, the name written on a slip of paper that felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. David, ever the professional, showed no outward reaction. He simply nodded, turned to his computer, and his fingers began to fly across the keyboard. He moved through legal and corporate databases with a speed and fluency that was mesmerizing. The only sound in the room for several long minutes was the soft, rhythmic clicking of the keys. I sat forward in my chair, my muscles tense, my breath held. "Okay, got it," he said finally, his voice low. He leaned into the screen, his eyes narrowing. "Polaris Holdings, incorporated in the Cayman Islands 6 years and 2 months ago." He paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He clicked a few more times, opening new windows, cross-referencing information. Well, this is interesting." "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight. David swiveled the large monitor towards me, his face grim. "See for yourself." On the screen was a corporate registration document, a dry, official form from a world away. There were a few names listed as directors, all of them lawyers from a local firm in Grand Cayman. Standard practice for setting up an offshore entity. But then my eyes scanned down to the line that mattered. The line that read, "Ultimate Beneficial Owner." The sole shareholder. The person who truly owned and controlled everything. It wasn't Nathan. It wasn't my father. It was Patricia Howard. My mother. I stared at the screen, and the air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. It was as if I'd been punched in the gut by a ghost. My mother. Patricia. The one who baked cookies for my school bake sales. The one who cried at my college graduation. The one who always played the martyr, talking endlessly about her sacrifices for her family. Her voice always tinged with a gentle, wounded quality. She wasn't just an accomplice, a wife going along with her husband's plans. She was the firewall. Her name, the name of a seemingly harmless, non-threatening suburban housewife, was the legal shield for the entire criminal enterprise. It was a move of breathtaking cynicism, and it was a betrayal so profound, so fundamental, it made me feel dizzy. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "My own mother?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "She's the one." "It's a smart play," David said, his voice clinical, pulling me back from the edge. "A damn smart play. In any initial investigation, law enforcement would look for the obvious players, Nathan, the charismatic frontman, or your father, the financial patriarch. Your mother would fly completely under the radar. She's the clean one. They used her identity to hide the assets." The timeline clicked into place with sickening precision. 6 years and 2 months ago. That was almost to the day, the Sunday afternoon I'd sat at their dining table and signed away my future. This wasn't a recent, desperate idea born of Nathan's failures. This had been their long game all along. They had been meticulously planning this for years. "We need those papers, Michael," David said, his voice firm, cutting through my shock. "The family trust documents you signed. Now more than ever, is the missing link. It will prove the direct transfer of your assets, your inheritance, into this shell corporation controlled by your mother. It establishes motive. It establishes conspiracy. It's the whole damn case. I knew exactly where they were. My father was a creature of habit and arrogance. All important family documents, deeds, stock certificates, wills, trusts, were kept in the large, black, fireproof sentry safe in his home office. A safe I hadn't seen open since I was a teenager. But I remembered the combination. He'd set it to my mother's birthday and their anniversary, a 4-number sequence. He probably thought it was a sentimental, romantic gesture. I now realized it was just another display of his monumental ego, the belief that his world was so secure, so untouchable, that he didn't even need a complex password. My opportunity came the following Sunday. It was a ritual. My mother would insist on a family dinner. Just the 4 of us. "It's been too long," she'd trill over the phone. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but I knew it was my only chance to get into the house. The dinner was an exercise in torture. I felt like a spy deep in enemy territory. Every smile they gave me felt like a lie. Every question about my work felt like an interrogation. I had to force myself to eat, to make small talk, to play the part of the dutiful, slightly boring son they believed me to be. After the meal, my father and Nathan went out to the back patio to smoke cigars and talk about business, a ritual that had always excluded me. My mother was in the kitchen, humming as she loaded the dishwasher. Emma, my brilliant, perceptive wife, played her part to perfection. She went into the kitchen to help, engaging my mother in a detailed, distracting conversation about a new medical drama on television. This was my window. It was now or never. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slipped down the quiet, carpeted hall to my father's office. The door, as always, was unlocked. The room was dark, smelling of old leather, lemon furniture polish, and his cloying, spicy aftershave. The black safe sat in the corner like a silent, squat beast. My hands were trembling as I knelt in front of it in the gloom. I could hear the low murmur of their voices from the patio, the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. I felt exposed from all sides. I had minutes at most. I took a deep breath and spun the dial. Right past the first number, then back to it. Left past the second number, stopping on it. Right to the third. Left to the fourth. The familiar clicks of the tumblers sounded like gunshots in the silent room. I pulled the heavy, chrome handle. The door swung open with a soft, satisfying whoosh. My eyes scanned the contents. Stacks of files in manila folders, held together by rubber bands. Deeds, stock certificates, passports. My hands, clumsy with adrenaline, scrambled through them, searching for the file with my name on it. Howard Family Trust. There it was. I pulled it out, my breath held tight in my chest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the folder. And there it was. A thick document over 50 pages long. And on the last page, my own signature, clear as day. The signature of a naive, trusting fool. I didn't have time to read it all. I didn't have a copier. My only option was my phone. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I started taking pictures as fast as I could. The main signatory page. The schedule of assets being transferred. A crucial addendum that specifically named Polaris Holdings as a beneficiary. My phone's camera flash felt like a series of lightning strikes in the dark room, each one advertising my betrayal. Then I heard it. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Footsteps. Heavy ones. My blood turned to ice. It was my father. He was coming back for something. I shoved the file back into the safe, my movements frantic and clumsy. I slammed the heavy door shut, but I didn't have time to spin the dial to relock it. I just stood up, my heart pounding in my ears, and flattened myself behind the heavy, brocade curtains that covered the window, praying the darkness would hide me. The office door swung open. My father walked in, flicking on the green-shaded desk lamp. He hadn't seen me. He went to his desk, opened the humidor, and selected a fresh cigar. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, his eyes swept the room, a casual, proprietary glance. I was sure he'd see my shoes beneath the curtain. I held my breath, my body rigid as stone. He grunted, seemingly satisfied, turned off the light, and left, closing the door softly behind him. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. Then, on silent feet, I slipped out of the office and back into the brightly lit living room, my phone clutched in my hand. It felt hot and heavy, a radioactive artifact loaded with the truth. I had the proof. It wasn't perfect, just a few blurry, hastily taken pictures on a phone. But it was enough. It was the bullet for the gun I was about to fire. The eye of the storm had passed. Now it was time for me to become the hurricane. The night of my parents' 40th anniversary and retirement party was a masterfully orchestrated illusion. The country club ballroom was bathed in a warm, golden light, designed to make everyone look younger and richer. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted prime rib. It was a sea of familiar faces from my childhood, my parents' friends, their business associates, people who had pinched my cheeks at Christmas parties and given me $5 bills on my birthday. They all greeted me with warm smiles and firm handshakes, patting me on the back, telling me how proud they were of my wonderful family. The irony was a physical weight in my chest, making it hard to breathe. My family was holding court near the small stage set up at one end of the room. They were the sun, and everyone else was a planet orbiting them. My father, Edward, looked regal and commanding in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. My mother, Patricia, was a vision in a sparkling silver dress. Her laughter, a sound I now recognized as a performance, echoing through the room. And Nathan, my brother, stood beside them, a glass of champagne in hand, soaking in the adoration. He was the golden child at the apex of his glory. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a condescending, triumphant wink, a silent message that said, "Look at all this. This is my world. You are just a visitor." I just gave him a small, tight, unreadable smile in return. Not for long, I thought. The thought was so cold and clear it surprised me. Emma squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered, her eyes full of concern. "I have to be," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's now or never." David Pham was already here, a reassuringly solid presence. Dressed in a simple dark suit, he was mingling near the back, a silent observer, my one ally in a room full of people who saw me as nothing more than an extension of my family's success. After an hour of cocktails and painfully superficial chatter, my father took the stage to a round of warm applause. He tapped the microphone, his smile radiating confidence. He gave a gracious, charming speech about his 40 years in business, about building a legacy, about the importance of hard work and family values. He thanked his beautiful wife, his rock. The crowd listened, captivated. Then he turned the microphone over to my mother. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her voice thick with practiced emotion. She spoke about the joys of raising 2 wonderful sons, about the importance of leaving something meaningful behind for the next generation. It was a masterclass in public sentimentality, and the audience, especially the older women, were mesmerized. Finally, the moment came. My father beamed, his face glowing with pride. And now, to talk about the future, a future he is building not just for himself, but for all of us. I want to bring up my son, our son, who is taking the lessons of the past to build a better, more secure tomorrow. Please join me in welcoming my son, Nathan. The room erupted in applause. Nathan strode onto the stage, shaking my father's hand, kissing my mother's cheek. He was a natural performer. He launched into his presentation, his voice smooth and confident. Behind him, a large screen lit up with slick graphics and charts showing impossibly perfect upward curves. He spoke of disrupting the retirement industry, of paradigm shifts in wealth management, of protecting the legacy of the generation in the room. He was selling a beautiful, intoxicating dream. I watched the faces in the audience. I saw Mr. Warren, my father's oldest friend and a retired CEO from a Fortune 500 company. He was a man my father revered, a man whose respect he craved above all others. He was leaning forward, listening intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. I saw the Wilsons, our old neighbors, their faces filled with a hopeful, trusting light. These were good people, honest people. The people my family was willing to sacrifice on the altar of their greed. Nathan reached his grand finale. And so, for my parents' dearest friends, for the people in this room tonight, and tonight only, we are offering a special one-time Founders Circle investment opportunity. My associates are now moving through the room with the commitment forms. This is your chance to get in on the ground floor of the future, to secure your family's legacy for generations to come. As waiters in tuxedos began to move through the crowd with elegant leather-bound clipboards and expensive-looking pens, I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't cause a scene. I just rose to my feet from my table near the front, and a sudden, localized silence fell over our section of the room. Everyone turned to look at me. "Nathan," I said, my voice calm, clear and steady. It carried in the suddenly quiet room. "I have a question." He looked momentarily thrown off, annoyed at the interruption to his carefully orchestrated climax. "Sure, Mike. Quick one, though. We're on a tight schedule here." "It is a quick one," I said, taking a few steps into the aisle, placing myself between my family on the stage and their intended victims in the audience. "You talk a lot about the future. I want to ask about the past. Specifically, I want to ask about the seed money for this incredible fund. Where did it come from?" Nathan faltered just for a second. "That's proprietary financial information, bro. It's funded by company assets." "Is it?" I asked, my voice getting louder, more confident, reaching every corner of the ballroom. "Or is it my asset? Is it my inheritance?" "Nathan? The inheritance my grandparents left for me?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. My father started to move towards the edge of the stage, his face a mask of thunder. "Michael, sit down. This is not the time or the place for your dramatics." "I think this is the perfect time and the perfect place," I said, turning my gaze to him. I was no longer the quiet, accommodating son. I was someone they had never seen before. "This is a room full of people you call your dearest friends. Don't they deserve to know exactly who they're getting into business with?" I let my eyes drift to my mother, who was staring at me, her face frozen in a horrified smile. "Mom," I said, my voice softening with false sincerity, "can you tell us about Polaris Holdings? The shell corporation you own in the Cayman Islands? Is that where you keep the company assets?" Patricia's face went completely white. She looked like she'd been struck by lightning. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I turned my attention back to my brother. "And Nathan, can you explain why you told your former assistant, Jessica, to create fake performance reports? Is that part of your proprietary algorithm? Or is it just old-fashioned fraud?" Nathan's bravado finally shattered. The charming mask fell away, revealing the snarling, cornered animal beneath. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed, his voice venomous and low. "Oh, I think I do," I said, and now I began to walk slowly towards the stage. I didn't need a projector. I didn't need a PowerPoint. I had the truth. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Because I have pictures. Pictures of the family trust documents I signed when I was 25, when I was too naive to know better. The documents that transferred my entire share of the Howard family trust to Polaris Holdings. The trust my grandparents set up for both of their grandsons. I stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at my family. They were huddled together now, exposed and trapped under the bright, unforgiving stage lights. "You didn't just build this company on lies," I said, my voice thick with the emotion I had suppressed for weeks, for years, for a lifetime. "You built it on me. You stole my future to fund this scam." Then, for my final move, I looked out into the stunned crowd, my eyes finding Mr. Warren. He was a man whose integrity was legendary. He was the key. "Mr. Warren," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "My father has told me my whole life that he respects you more than any man alive. So I ask you, as a man of honor, would you invest your retirement in a fund that was built on a son's stolen inheritance? Would you trust your family's future to a family that preys on its own?" The silence in the room was absolute, profound, and devastating. Every single eye was on Mr. Warren. He stood up slowly, a tall, imposing, dignified figure. He looked at my father, his old friend, and his face was etched with a look of profound, soul-crushing disappointment. He didn't say a single word. He just gave a small, sharp shake of his head, turned with military precision, and walked out of the ballroom. That was the signal. The dam broke. A murmur swept through the crowd, turning into a rustle of movement, a rush of people grabbing their coats and purses, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and pity. The Wilsons looked at me, their eyes wide with dawning horror, and then they too hurried towards the exit. Within 2 minutes, the room was half empty. My family was left alone on the stage, their perfect party in ruins, their gilded world collapsing around them in real time. My father stared at me, his face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. My mother was sobbing, not from remorse, but from the unbearable agony of public humiliation. And Nathan just looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I had done it. I had spoken the truth, and it was more powerful, more explosive, and more liberating than I could have ever imagined. The party didn't just end. It imploded, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. Within minutes, the grand ballroom was a ghost town, a testament to a social catastrophe. It was a graveyard of half-empty glasses, abandoned appetizers, and betrayed trust. The bewildered staff moved about awkwardly, clearing plates while trying not to stare at my family, who remained frozen on the stage like a horrifying tableau in a museum of failure. I turned and walked to the back of the room, my legs feeling strangely steady. David Pham was waiting for me, his face impassive but his eyes holding a look of deep respect. "It's done," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the swirling chaos. "I've already made the call. I'm forwarding our entire file, your sworn testimony, Jessica's statement, the corporate records for Polaris Holdings, the photos of the trust documents, and my own notes as a witness to tonight's events, to a contact in the district attorney's white-collar crime division. An investigator will be in touch within the week." There was no sense of triumph, no celebratory fist pump, just a hollow, aching emptiness. I had won, but the cost was immeasurable. What does it profit a man to gain justice but lose his entire family, his entire history? Emma came to my side, her warmth a shield against the cold reality of what I had just done. She wrapped her arm around my waist, her grip firm and supportive. "Let's go home, Michael," she said softly. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. The public humiliation was one thing. The private reckoning was another. There was one last thing to do. I had to face them one last time, away from the prying eyes of the world, in the place where it all began. We drove to my parents' house in silence. The familiar, tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood seemed alien, like a set from a movie about someone else's life. The house, a large, imposing colonial I had always seen as a symbol of stability, now looked like a mausoleum. The lights were on. I walked up the familiar stone path and used my old key to open the front door. The sound of the key in the lock was unnervingly loud. They were in the living room, a room filled with expensive furniture and loveless memories. They had taken off their party clothes and were now in their casual, at-home attire, which somehow made the scene even more pathetic. My father was pacing back and forth in front of the cold fireplace like a caged lion. My mother was crumpled on the sofa, weeping into a silk cushion. Nathan was standing by the window, staring out into the darkness, his back rigid with fury. They all turned as I entered, Emma a silent shadow behind me. If I had held any lingering, foolish hope for a flicker of remorse or a moment of regret, it was extinguished in that instant. What I saw in their eyes was not shame. It was pure, undiluted rage, aimed directly at me. "How could you?" my mother shrieked, her voice a ragged, ugly sound I'd never heard before. She scrambled up from the sofa, her face blotchy and smeared with mascara. "In front of everyone, our friends, our life, you've ruined us. You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin you," I said, my voice colder and harder than I'd ever known it could be. "You ruined yourselves years ago. I just held up a mirror so you could finally see the reflection." Nathan spun around from the window, his face twisted in a sneer of contempt. "You were always jealous," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You were always the second best, the boring one, the failure. You couldn't stand to see me succeed, to see me build something, so you had to tear it all down." "Succeed?" I let out a short, sharp, bitter laugh. "You call lying, cheating, and plotting to steal from retirees success? You call stealing your own brother's inheritance building something?" "I have a different word for it, Nathan. It's called being a pathetic, heartless criminal." But it was my father's reaction that was the true climax of the evening. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, his body vibrating with controlled fury. His eyes were not hot with anger. They were two chips of blue ice. "I always knew it," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each word a carefully polished stone of hatred. "I told your mother for years, but she was too soft. You were the weak link in this family. You were too sensitive, too sentimental. You didn't have the stomach for what it takes to build a real legacy in this world. We gave you everything. A name, an education, a comfortable life. And you threw it all back in our faces out of spite. For my entire life, that accusation, delivered with that tone, would have shattered me. It was the core fear of my existence. That I was, in his eyes, a disappointment. That I was weak. It would have sent me crawling back, apologizing, begging for his approval. But something inside me had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. I was no longer that boy, desperate for a pat on the head from a man who was incapable of giving it. I looked him straight in the eye, my own gaze as steady and unyielding as his. "You're wrong," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "You're wrong about everything. What you call weakness, I call compassion. What you call sentimentality, I call a conscience. My sense of right and wrong isn't a flaw. It's the one thing you couldn't beat out of me, the one thing you couldn't steal from me, no matter how hard you tried. It's what makes me different from you. And I have never been more grateful for that difference than I am at this moment." I took a deliberate step back, creating a physical space that mirrored the emotional chasm that now irrevocably separated us. "This is the last time I will ever set foot in this house," I declared, my voice resonating in the tense, poisoned silence. "This is the last time I will speak to any of you, unless it is through a lawyer in a deposition. As of this moment, you are no longer my family." I turned, took Emma's hand, and walked out the front door without looking back. As I closed the heavy oak door behind me, I heard my mother let out a final, anguished sob. But it wasn't the sound of a mother mourning a lost son. It was the sound of a queen mourning a lost kingdom. And I knew, with a certainty that was both liberating and profoundly heartbreaking, that I had finally, truly, escaped. The year that followed was a strange, disorienting landscape of legal proceedings and personal reconstruction. The wheels of justice, I learned, turn slowly, but they do turn. The district attorney's office, armed with the evidence David and I had provided, moved with a methodical and relentless efficiency. My father and Nathan were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Their assets, including the house I grew up in and the contents of Polaris Holdings, were frozen by court order. The story eventually hit the local business journal, a short, sanitized article about a prominent local family's investment firm under investigation for irregularities. It was a quiet, clinical, and deeply unsatisfying epitaph for their loud, flamboyant reign of deceit. While their world was shrinking down to the size of a courtroom and a lawyer's office, mine was, for the first time, expanding. Emma and I made a decision. We needed a true fresh start, a geographical cure. We sold our house, packed our belongings, and moved 3 states away, to a smaller, quieter city nestled in the mountains, a place where the air was clean and nobody knew the Howard family name. We needed a place with no ghosts. With the portion of the inheritance that David Pham, my bulldog lawyer, managed to claw back for me in a civil suit before it was all seized by the federal government, I did something I had only allowed myself to dream of. I opened my own clinic, but not the kind I had before, catering to the wealthy and worried well of the suburbs. This was different. I leased a small, unassuming office space in a modest part of town and founded the Second Chance Counseling Center. It was a nonprofit practice. My mission was simple, and it was written on the frosted glass of the front door, providing free or low-cost counseling and support for victims of financial fraud and psychological abuse. My first client was a woman named Eleanor, a bright, fiercely independent retired schoolteacher in her late 70s. She had a kind face, but her eyes held a deep, haunted shame. She told me she had lost her entire life savings, over $200,000, to a sophisticated phone scammer pretending to be her grandson in trouble overseas. She spoke in a whisper, as if confessing a terrible sin. As I listened to her story, a story of trust weaponized and dignity stolen, I didn't just feel the clinical empathy of a counselor. I felt a profound, gut-level connection. I saw my own journey, my own naivete, reflected in her pain. In helping her navigate her feelings of shame and anger, I was navigating my own. In giving her tools to rebuild her self-worth, I was reinforcing my own. I wasn't just helping her. I was honoring my own survival. I was turning my greatest pain into my most powerful, and now most valuable asset. Life found a new, gentler rhythm. It was quieter. It was simpler. It was filled with long hikes in the mountains with Emma, our boots crunching on the fallen leaves. It was filled with dinners with new friends, people who knew me only as Michael, the counselor who was passionate about his work, not Michael, the son of a criminal. It was filled with the deep, satisfying exhaustion that comes from a day of truly meaningful work. I was not just healing. I was growing. Then, about a year after that fateful party, my past came knocking. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in the fall. I was outside in our new backyard. A small patch of green the first was slowly turning into a garden, my hands covered in rich, dark earth. A rental car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. My Aunt Susan got out. She looked older, smaller, and more tired than I'd ever seen her. The forced cheerfulness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a weary desperation. She wrung her hands as she walked towards me, a gesture so painfully reminiscent of my mother it made my stomach clench. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was in the area for a conference, and I had to see you. I had to try. I didn't move. I stayed kneeling in the dirt, the trowel held loosely in my hand, a silent, earthy barrier between us." "Why are you here, Susan?" I asked, my voice flat. "Your mother. She's not doing well, Michael. She's a shell of her former self. The house is gone. The friends are gone. And your father and Nathan. The trial is next month. The prosecutor is recommending significant prison time. They're gonna go to prison, Michael. It's a mess. A total and complete mess." I just looked at her, my face unreadable. "And," I asked. "And I was thinking," she continued, taking a hesitant step onto the lawn, as if treading on sacred ground. "I was thinking, maybe you could help. Maybe if you spoke to the judge, wrote a letter to the court, you could tell them it was all a big misunderstanding, that Nathan got in over his head. You're a respected professional. You have such a good reputation now. They would listen to you. After all," she said, her eyes pleading, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "It's family. It's family." The two words I had lived my life by, the two words that had been used as both a shield and a cage. They hit me with the force of a physical blow. After everything that had happened, after all the deliberate cruelty, the years of calculated theft, the utter lack of remorse, this was her solution. For me to lie. For me to perjure myself. For me to sacrifice my own hard-won integrity on the same old rotten altar of family. I slowly stood up, wiping my dirt-caked hands on my jeans. I walked over to her, and for the first time, I saw her with perfect, cold clarity. I saw her not as my kind, doting aunt, but as what she truly was, a professional enabler, a vital cog in the machine of our family's deep and abiding dysfunction. Her lifelong role was to smooth over the cracks, to manage the appearances, to make the abuse palatable, to always ask the victim to be the bigger person. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. It was a locked door. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. No, but they're your parents. Your brother. How can you be so heartless? Heartless. I shook my head, a deep, profound sadness settling over me. No, Aunt Susan. I'm being healthy. There's a difference. They made their choices over and over again for years, and I have made mine. My choice is to live an honest life. My choice is to help the kind of people they saw as easy targets. You coming here today asking me to lie for them proves that you and they have learned absolutely nothing. It proves that walking away was the sanest, kindest thing I have ever done for myself. Tears of frustration and failure welled in her eyes. You're being so cold, Michael. I don't even recognize you. Good, I said softly. I'm glad. I turned and walked back to my garden, leaving her standing alone on my lawn. A few moments later, I heard the rental car's engine start, and the sound of it driving away. I didn't look back. I knelt in the dirt, the sun warm on my back. I picked up my trowel and dug it deep into the rich, dark earth. I was planting new roots. My roots, in ground that I had chosen, ground that was clean, and ground that was finally unequivocally mine. A few months later, long after the trial had concluded and the predictable sentences were handed down, one final piece of my old life arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain, made of cheap paper, the return address a federal correctional facility in another state. I expected it might be from Nathan, filled with vitriol and blame. But it wasn't. The handwriting on the front, sharp, angry, and imperious, was my father's. I let the letter sit on my kitchen counter for a full day before I touched it again. I wasn't afraid of it, but I felt it deserved a moment of deliberate consideration. It was, after all, the final communique from a world I had left behind. Finally, on a quiet morning, with a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside me, I slid it open. What could he possibly have to say? Was it a letter of apology? A confession born of long, lonely nights in a prison cell? An explanation for his actions? It was none of those things. It was so much worse and, in a way, so much more clarifying. The letter was 4 pages long, front and back, written in his familiar, aggressive scrawl. It was a tirade, a manifesto of a narcissist. It was a final, desperate attempt to reassert his control, to wound me from behind bars, to have the last definitive word. He never once expressed a shred of remorse for the people he and Nathan had planned to defraud. He never acknowledged the calculated theft of my inheritance. Instead, he blamed me for everything. He wrote that I was a weak, ungrateful child who had been manipulated by an ambitious wife. He claimed I had destroyed the family legacy, a legacy he had spent his entire life building, all out of a petty, lifelong jealousy of my brother's natural brilliance. He wrote, in chilling detail, that one day, when Emma had left me and my life was empty, I would wake up and realize the true magnitude of my betrayal, and that I would die a lonely, bitter man, haunted by what I had thrown away. You could have been a part of something great, he wrote in the final, chilling paragraph. The ink pressed so hard it almost tore through the page. You could have ridden our coattails to a life you could never have built for yourself. But you were too small for it. You chose your insignificant, bleeding heart morality over loyalty. That is a sin I will never forgive. I read the letter once, then twice, letting the sheer, unadulterated venom wash over me. A few years ago, those words would have crippled me. They were a perfectly crafted weapon, designed to strike at the heart of my deepest, oldest fears. That I was unlovable, that I was flawed, that I was, and always had been, the problem. But as I sat there, in my quiet, sunlit kitchen, in the life I had built with my own 2 hands, a life of purpose and love, I felt a profound and liberating nothing. The words on the page were just ink. They were the desperate, impotent ramblings of a fallen king, a man so imprisoned by his own ego that he couldn't even see the bars of the literal prison that now surrounded him. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a sad, pathetic old man who had lost everything because he had always valued the wrong things. I stood up, took the letter, and walked over to a box in the hall closet where I kept old, unimportant papers. I didn't rip it up. Ripping it would have given it a power it didn't deserve. It would have been an act of passion, and I felt none. I simply placed it inside the box, alongside my own birth certificate and old college report cards. It was just another document from a life that no longer belonged to me, a historical artifact. I closed the lid and put the box back on the top shelf behind the winter coats. That was the past. It was finally, truly over. I walked back into the living room, where Emma was reading by the window, the afternoon sun streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She looked up and smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made my heart feel full. "Everything okay?" she asked. I went to her and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of her hair. "Everything?" I said, my voice full of a certainty that resonated to my very core. "Is perfect." We stood together for a long moment, looking out at the mountains, at the vast open blue sky. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that truth is thicker than blood. And sometimes the most loving, most courageous thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. The courage to choose your own family, your own values, your own life. I had lost the family I was born into, yes. But in doing so, I had finally, truly found myself. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your family and your principles? I'd be honored to read your experience. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.